Hi, and thank you for joining us on another installment of the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater Through the Decades series. We have a theme for this series entry. It would be the 1970s, and all of our guests here on this segment have all been involved in the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater, not exclusively during that decade, but have many experiences that have occurred over the 1970 to 1980 period. And we're going to start off by allowing those here on this panel to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their connection to the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater. And we are going to start to my left here with Bernie Nowicki.
Thank you. My name is Bernie Nowicki, and I've been a member of Beaver Dam Community Theater since 1964. I did a lot of behind-the-scenes work, did a lot of construction. I can remember building sets about 1 hour Martinizing, dropping them out of a window, hauling them over to Wisconsin Theater and setting them up. I've been on the board of directors, I've held offices. That's about it.
Have you been in any plays?
Yes, South Pacific.
I was in South Pacific.
The first one?
Second one.
Second
First
one.
music.
Third one.
First musical. Third
musical.
musical.
First musical.
That's right. And so you go right back to the early days then.
Right.
All right, very good. And now, who is this lovely lady to your right here?
That is Dory.
Hi, Dory. How are you?
Hi, I am Dory, and I've been involved, or was involved, for about 15, 20 years from the beginning, and mostly behind the scenes. I was in one play, and that was fantastic. I was a mute, so I didn't have to talk. But other than that, I worked behind the scenes, did a lot of props and that type of thing, and then eventually got more into the business end of it, and tickets, business managers, and so forth. It was a very enjoyable thing to do, and we did it for a long time, and our 3 children also got involved, which was really nice when they were at the right age and had the time.
Now, Dory Nowicki and I have a connection in that we both either work or have worked at WBEV in the past, and I find it ironic that your only role at the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater was that of a mute.
Well, that's because I talk so much on the radio.
Enough to say. Carolyn Buss is also here with us. Carolyn, how are you today? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm fine. I haven't really bad cold other than fine. I don't know how long I've been in community theater, but longer than dirt. I've been here a long time. I've always loved the theater. It's always been part of my life. And I always have had the pleasure of working with a lot of great people. I did a lot of props, and I was in a couple of plays, and I enjoyed every minute of it, and I'm so glad to see the theater opening up into such a beautiful building.
Do you remember your first play?
No, I don't remember the first one. I was in Cactus Flower.
Cactus Flower. What
Yeah,
year was that, Annette?
I shared it with another gal, and
That was 1970.
1970.
70? Oh,
Very fitting.
yeah, it was a really fun part. I enjoyed it.
Did you remember your name?
Botticelli Springtime.
Did you write it? Were you in the same play?
Yes, she was.
Was that your first play too?
No, Carmen was in other plays.
Now, if you would introduce yourself, Carmen.
Are you ready? Are
I'm
you
done.
finished?
Have you wrapped it up here? Okay, sorry. Didn't mean to move on so quickly, yeah.
Carmen Hansen. I was one of the fortunate charter members of community theater. I knew Annette from college, and so when I got to Beaver Dam a year before she did, and when she came up with this marvelous idea of starting a theater here, there were some of us, the Van Herens and my husband Bob and I, we were all for it. So that's how I got involved right from the beginning. So in the 60s, my children were very small. Bob and I had to take turns being involved. And by the 70s, they were old enough so that we could, get away a little more. So it's the decade that we're here to talk about tonight that I really was busy doing things for theater.
In the spotlight, behind the scenes?
Well, I was in Cactus Flower. In the 60s, I was in Arsenic and No Lace, which was the second show ever. I don't know, I directed a show. I don't know how that ever happened, but, you know, found out I could do all kinds of things that I didn't know I could do because we needed people to step up and be chairman of makeup or props or whatever. And at that time, there was just this good, solid core of theater people that just really worked hard and kept it going.
And that's a common theme that is heard around not just this community theater, but many community theaters. I imagine you wind up stepping up and doing things you never thought you would before.
Right.
Well, and are we done?
I have more to
I
say,
cut
but-
Carolyn off.
No,
I have to go to my right
yeah,
here
go
now.
ahead.
Okay, all right, good. Carmen Hansen. And now to the folks to my right here, we are going to begin to my immediate right. Mary, if you could introduce yourself, please.
My name is Mary Kolstad Miller. The first show that I ever worked on was Fiddler on the Roof. I was 14. My very good friend, long life friend, Ronnie Harper, dragged me down to the first building. And I walked through the side door, and at the top of the steps there was Roger Van Haren, and he pointed at me and he said, "You're a Kolstad, aren't you?" And I kind of, "Is that all right?" And that was where I met Jerry Camps, and that's where the theater bug bit me, and I've been a set painter ever since.
A set painter.
Yep.
Have you spent time in front of the set?
Sure,
Okay.
a little bit.
But your preference is
Yes, I prefer to be a set painter.
a set painter. Does that translate to other assets of art in your life? Do you like painting other things other than sets?
Sure, but the theater really provided an outlet for me, a creative outlet where I could experiment and be messy and be a problem solver and work with really great people, and it was just, it's ever since.
She also sang with our ambassador group, Take Note, for many years.
Yep.
Oh, you're a member of the Take Note group.
Yes, I am.
Was that because you were a Kolstad too?
I don't think
That
so.
had nothing to do with
I
it.
don't think so.
And to Mary's right over here, we have got Barb Otten. Barb, how are you? If you could tell us a little bit about yourself. I already introduced you, sorry.
That's all right. I've been involved in theater since we arrived in Beaver Dam. It was very interesting how we got involved. Our children were taking swimming lessons at the Y, and we must have looked like we were brand new as a community. And Roger Van Haren came over and said, you know, telling us a little bit about Beaver Dam, and then he mentioned the fact that we actually had a theater group that wanted to know if any of us were interested. I said, not at all, and John said, yes, I am. So a few days later, about 5:30 in the morning, the telephone rang, and I thought surely something had happened that was serious, and John answered the phone and came back and said, oh, it was the theater people. They were calling him to move furniture from one building to another to do the show. And I said, well, those people are crazy. And he started getting dressed. I said, you're crazy too. And that was it. And that's where it started and went on from there.
John, you've moved a lot of furniture then.
Yes,
Over the years.
yes, I remember that. And stage, I remember at the old theater downtown, we had to move heavy, very heavy sections of stage for productions and take them down and then put them back. That was an arduous job. But Barb said we got bit by the theater, and I got bit hard. And so my first production the subject was roses. I was backstage moving furniture. And from that point on, I think I have been in close to 3,500 performances on the stage at various places, but and learned a lot, and it's been really a great experience. I hadn't done theater for almost 20 years when I came to town, And that was back in high school. I'm going to tell you when that was. But boy, it was just great to get involved with Beaver Dam Area Community Theater, and I've been part of the board. I've directed shows, of course acted, done backstage work, and have learned a heck of a lot about theater through the years.
And the stage was set here at the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater for all of that.
Yes, I hadn't done any theater since high school, so yeah, it propelled me.
Well, Annette Camps is the final member of the group here that we'll be introducing today. Annette, tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would.
Well, I'm a co-founder of the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater. As I'm listening to all these introductions, I realize how fortunate I have been through all of these years to know these people. I mean, they are the backbone of our theater, as are so many volunteers over the years. And these people are all model volunteers. They gave their heart and soul to the theater for many, many years and still are in one way or another. So I think community theater is very, very fortunate, and we've got a lot of people who are not at the table tonight who are part of that as well. But that's the key. And then also, as I was listening, I was thinking how our theater has a family theme. Almost always, once one person would get involved, the family would follow. And I think that's a really strong component of our theater too.
We should mention that this video series is an idea of Annette's. Annette, what is your goal? What is your hope with this series that we're doing?
Well, I think I mentioned in the first decade, history is valuable, and it's good to know where you come from to know where you want to go. And so many people in our community at large has invested time and money to this organization. And I'm hoping down the years, we have a history room in this new building. So we'll be having albums and other references like these videotapes there and props from different shows and so on. I think the success of a theater like ours is built on its history. I think the stories that we tell about how we started and all the difficulties we had have almost turned into myths that sustain us and keep us going. And even if people don't know all the history, they feel it somehow. And I think that's really important to the future of our organization.
We filmed the first part of this, the early years at the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater building on North Spring Street. We call it the old community theater now. We are in the Fine Arts Center, which just opened its doors as we record this a few weeks ago. The era that we're talking about today predates all of that. Again, 1970 to 1980. Can you guys paint a picture for me? I know some of you touched upon it in your initial remarks, but put us in the 1970s there. What was it like to put on one of these productions when you don't have a permanent house, a permanent stage for you to be able to pull this off? Who wants to go first?
Well, one of the things that I remember so vividly is when you're in a show, or even working on a show at the Wisconsin Theater, and you had to go from one side, one entrance or exit, to the other. And you had to walk very carefully because you could not touch that screen. The screen was right there, and so you had about that much space to get to the other side. And sometimes you even had to run around the outside of the building to get where you had to be. That stuck in my memory.
That Wisconsin Theater, if I'm not mistaken, as we record this in 2019, is the Rogers Cinema.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, over there by Park Plaza Pizza. How long was that your venue then up until 1983, or did you have other homes as well?
Oh, yeah.
Someone else can speak to that.
I can remember vividly the very first time when somebody said, when we were moving from the workshop down to the theater to do a play, and they said, Carolyn, are you going to be here to help us move? And I said, oh, sure. I had no idea. What I was into. Then I had to go down to the show house and pull the seats out. And then we had to get Fletcher's truck in the middle of the night to load it up, to take it down there. It was just a zoo, and when I got home at 3 o'clock in the morning, my husband said, "Where the hell have you been?" I said, "You're not gonna believe this, but I've been moving seats." And you know, for some odd reason, I can reflect back on those days and say how much fun they were. And then, you know, my husband says to me, "Will you stop while you're at it and get my mother something for Mother's Day?" I never did like his mother. So I got her a dozen long-stem roses. And I gave them to her. I said, "Here you go. Give them to her. I got things to do at the theater." And he kind of probably told me that. He thought that wasn't very funny. However, that was one of the fun things that we had to do in the middle of the night was, and God bless Fletcher and his truck. How many years did that man let us use his truck to move whatever?
Many years.
Years and years. It was, when they say it's an effort of the community too, they were very, very generous to us. It was a nice thing.
But John, you must remember other places where we performed during those years.
Boy, you put me on the spot.
The Elks Club was one of them.
Yeah,
Exactly, exactly. We did 2 shows there. I Do, and Only an Orphan Girl.
I remember I do.
Okay.
Here's the I Do. That was at the Traders Village Square.
Yep.
What are your memories of I Do? Were you involved in that? Anybody that was in I Do?
I wasn't in it. I'm sure I worked on the sets and so forth. I don't remember exactly what I did.
They start to bleed together after a while.
Yeah, they do.
Oh, they sure
They
do.
do.
That was a 2-person show.
Yeah, there's only 2 people.
Alan Van Haren and Lee Schmidt, yeah.
Yeah.
And she does, because at the Elks Club, there was no backstage or any place really to change or anything, that everybody had to, yeah, it was very makeshift. And I think did we have a couple of dinner type shows there?
That was a dinner show. This was the only one.
The menu was really quite funny. Well, not just the menu, but they wrote like the props. It says the realistic properties are due to the indefatigable efforts of Miss Kay Gietzel and her assistants. They wrote it in really flowery language. But we also performed at the middle school.
Yeah, that was
Oh, junior high.
Oklahoma, and then Pippin too.
Yeah.
And there we had to basically build a theater in a gym that had terrible acoustics.
Yeah.
So when we did Oklahoma, Tom Newman, who's very creative and innovative, suggested that we buy a lot of old parachutes, I think from some military source, and they hung them like clouds in the ceiling so that it would help absorb the sound for the acoustics. And then we bought old folding lawn chairs from some resort or something in Wisconsin Dells. They had been sitting outside for years, so they were not in the greatest shape. And we put, we had level risers, and we did it like almost in the round, like 3-sided theater. And we put up those chairs, and the webbing on them, some of it was pretty weak. So we got in a little trouble because once in a while someone fell through that webbing while they were watching the show. But it was difficult, but at the same time, it was kind of fun to do it in 3 sides. And again, called for people to be very creative and innovative about building a theater in a gym.
Some of these locations, I imagine, required you to take down and set up night after night.
Sure.
Some of them, were you allowed to keep stuff up in the middle school
At the
and
middle
such?
school we
and the
did
outside?
because school was out in the summer and we were able to rehearse there. We rehearsed in a lot of different places.
Yeah.
Can some of you remember some of the other places we rehearsed?
Well, at the Wisconsin Theater, we had to take it down and put it up every day because they had movies.
Right.
That's when
In
Carolyn,
between.
was that when Carolyn was taking seats out?
Yeah.
I have no idea how much fun that was.
The Wisconsin Theater, the movie theater, they blocked
For the performances.
for the performances, but
Yeah.
yeah, for dress rehearsal and tech rehearsal, it
Yeah.
went up and came down and went back to the little church theater.
Yeah.
What was it, because of the fact that they had a movie they were gonna show that we had to pull the thrust down and put the thing up again? And I thought to myself, why do we have to do this?
For the matinees, we had to be
Yeah,
over there
that's
for the
right, it was
matinees.
the
On Saturday, yeah.
Yeah.
11 o'clock, I remember it had to be 11 o'clock.
Yeah, it's crazy. You remember we rehearsed in Martinizing.
Up above Martinez.
Yeah, 1 hour.
And somewhere I read that there were rehearsals in a warehouse.
We were rehearsed in a warehouse. Where else did we rehearse?
Somewhere.
We had shows at the mall in between.
Yeah.
We had a show at Wayland Academy. We just flitted around from place to place for about 4 or 5 years until we purchased the building on Spring Street. But yeah, and so I think it was for about 4 years that we were not able to use the movie theater anymore. So we had to find things like Drager's and all these different tentative venues or temporary venues throughout the community.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And
No,
that's,
I don't
I
think you-
should really
I'm-
comment about the wonder facilities we had at the Wisconsin Theater. Do you remember one show? Was it Dick Watson put his shoes on the thing and the rats ate a hole in them?
Oh,
You remember?
all right,
That
since,
was one of our, what was that, Carmen?
I don't remember.
That
Since that name came up, I was just going to say, you know, in the Oscars and all these, they do a little memoriam of people. Would it be appropriate if we just all toss out names of people that we remember having worked with way back then?
I think that'd
Because
be
as I
great.
was going through all this stuff, I thought, oh my gosh, I haven't thought of those people forever.
That's a great
Like
idea.
Dick Watson, Bob and Dick Getch,
Mhm.
for example, and I'm sure everybody has names.
Clayton
Well-
Warden, Clayton Warden, he was.
And Dick McDermott, he was one of the
Oh,
originals.
yes,
And
and
he
the
got
actor.
us to
He's the
join.
one that got us involved, was Dick.
Because I worked with Dick at the radio station.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
It was one of those
Oh, it's
Doug Klitsky,
Mhm.
super endings.
They're not all passed away, but they're
No.
away from.
Susan Blakely.
yeah,
Mhm.
that's who I was thinking of. And
Joan
Rita
Morelli,
Clausen,
Ron
actually.
Nesty.
John and Rita and Susan did the very first thing that was held at the Baptist church.
Cabaret.
Who was it?
Cabaret.
Well, it was, that was interesting because it was the three of us. Rita Clevenger played piano,
Okay.
and Susan Blakely and I sang duets and solo numbers. And I had a beard. But at the halftime, at the break, I went and I shaved off the beard. And I put on, somewhere I've got a picture of, I put on a woman's wig and came out as a female. And the song was, You Could Drive a Person Crazy. And I was kind of interested, I wondered when would be the first moment that someone would discover that it was John. And it was Jimmy McMillan.
Oh, yeah.
Jimmy McMillan was sitting in there, and I could hear him. That's John. But that was, I have a picture of myself as a female, and I must say, I was very attractive.
No, it's not.
Well,
I brought the picture tonight.
you did.
I'll share it with you.
Yeah, where is
Put
it?
it on camera.
I heard that.
Well, we can't forget David Proctor.
No.
Can't forget David,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, he was, and I mentioned Clayton Warden briefly. He was a very dedicated worker for the theater for many years, and he wrote his own original play, which we staged, and he also organized a small little touring group that did plays around the area while he was involved in the theater. So he was very enthusiastic.
Justine Gilmore, I'm sure some of you were.
Oh, goodness.
Justine
Right.
from Randolph.
Right.
She was in a lot of shows.
Yep, she was. Yep.
Okay,
She was
just
in-
thought
Well,
that would be
there's
fun.
like Tom Wells and Joe Wells.
Yeah.
Tom Wells, we mentioned earlier, I think, how instrumental he was in creating our Constitution, which really has proved to be great forever.
Yeah.
But Joe worked backstage a lot and on props. A lot of people
Yes.
on props weren't there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Joan Thede, do you remember Joan
Sure.
Thede? She did a
Very
lot.
good connect.
Oh, Harry, yeah.
Beautiful voice.
He was wonderful.
And Lee and Terry Schmidt were very involved in the 70s. Well, she was Terry Meyer then.
Mhm.
Mary Grisham,
Where's Mary? Does
she's
anybody know?
in Milwaukee, I believe.
Jim Laird.
Jim Laird, who's just in Waupun, yep. Who else did I have? Oh, Gary Vandenberg, he did so
yeah.
much tech work for us, you remember him?
Mm.
Yeah, tech people are so valuable for the community theater, and it's usually some young person who, like today, would have been a computer whiz. That's the kind of person we were always looking for. Jim Greiner, oh my gosh, he worked for us forever, and lighting, that was his specialty. Nancy Molstead, do you remember her? She was in a
yes.
number of plays.
She was in Prisoner, because there's a picture
Yeah.
of her in there.
Yeah, and I think her husband was in one show too, maybe Star Spangled Girl, maybe?
Okay.
June Billman,
Oh, the Billman family, yes,
she was
the
so
kids too.
beautiful voice.
She
And-
sang in one of the, only an orphan girl. Do you remember she sang Only a Bird in a Golden Cage?
Oh,
June
yeah.
did. And then when we did that dinner
She
theater.
was in South Pacific.
Oh, yeah, she was, and Sound of Music. And Lisa Weisensell, who still
Playing.
plays for us. She was Lisa Miller then, she still plays for us. She's a wonderful pianist. Tom and Elaine File, also from WBED. Obviously, I was going through those programs and remembering all these people.
Yeah.
Gloria Wimmer, who did makeup for us forever. There were so many people who, loyal, were there anytime you called. And we had good-sized committees in most cases, too, I noticed in the
Yep.
programs, which isn't always the case today.
That's why the history room, I think, is going to be so much fun. And I hope people will use it, because
Right.
just like everybody had a good time tonight, looking through these binders, you do see people that you haven't thought of for such a long time, and it's really fun.
The Hankuses, too, must
Yep.
mention them.
Lee and
That
Jim.
was a family that was very involved,
The couch.
on stage and behind
That
the
Louis lit on
scenes.
fire.
Yeah.
We've had an opportunity to talk about a lot of the people that we remember from the 1970s era Beaver Dam Area Community Theater. Are there any roles that stick out in your mind, whether you were in them or it was a role that you remember that particularly sticks in your mind?
Well, I've got to talk about Fiddler on the Roof, first on here. And I had heard that it was going to be staged, got all excited, because I wanted to play Tevye. And I was excited about that, and lo and behold, Harry Goodkin
Yeah.
shows up
He was wonderful.
and took the role. I've since learned that there are joys and disappointments in theater. But I was in the show, I was Lazar Wolf.
Yep.
And at the end of the show, Harry, playing Tevye, asked people who are going to move out beyond, and Harry asked the question, Lazar, where are you going? And it occurred to me, and I said, Chicago. That wasn't in the script. But, and Harry was wonderful.
He had a beautiful voice, too.
Yes.
And I have to tell you, I've auditioned for Tevye 4 different times, including community theater. And 3 of those times I didn't get the role. I finally got the role. And the director of that show, I told him, he wondered, should we do Fiddler on the Roof and who would play Tevye? And I said, well, I can play Tevye. And he said, no, you're not Jewish. And my answer was, but I am an actor.
Now, did you shave your beard between acts in that production as well?
No, the cabaret show, that was it.
Any other memorable roles anybody wants to discuss from the 1970s?
Gloria McDaniel as Maine.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
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 She was wonderful.
She was great.
Oh.
And Nancy Mashman played her cohort.
Mhm.
And Marilyn Van Haren as Agnes Gooch. They
Yes.
were really, really great characters.
Oh, that was
Yeah.
a wonderful production.
Yeah.
Well, I remember too, in Hello Dolly, and Marilyn was Dolly. And I must have been fairly effective, because there was one time towards the end of the show where I stepped down stage in the audience, and I had been hoarse and horrible. And this little kid was sitting down in the front row and looking at me going, "You're disgusting." He didn't say that, but that was the look he had on his face. So when I went backstage, I said to myself, "I've got to change that kid." So, of course, at the end, Horace sings Hello Dolly to Marilyn. And I was supposed to walk to her, but I decided not to. I decided to hold my hand out until she came to me. And she did. And we danced, and I looked down at that kid, and he was going, "Yes." So, there are times those are glorious moments as theater, as an actor, when you can get some clear shift in what's going on.
In the 1970s, it was it a little different than today? You mentioned the tech people. You're setting down, putting these stages together. You don't have the sound and lights necessarily from one show to the next. What was the? Can you give us some insight into how things worked behind the scenes? Nobody was mic'd in the 1970s, were they?
No.
There was a shared mic, I imagine, if that.
No, but the theater, Wisconsin theater, the acoustics were wonderful.
Mhm.
We didn't need them there at all.
You needed to project. You needed to be
Right.
theatrical.
Oh, yeah.
You
Right.
couldn't rely on the
Right.
technology
Exactly.
like is done nowadays.
Yeah, that's true.
You ask about good things that happened when we did Our Town. The one scene where there's all these bodies sitting up on the stage. And they had the chairs there for all the dead people.
It's the funeral. Oh, no,
funeral.
wait, you're talking about something else. Never mind, go ahead.
No, but anyway, I was one of the dead guys, and Dick was backstage, and all of a sudden I look and I saw these shoes next to me, and I thought, "What are you doing out here?" Because it was a quiet set. And he said, "I never saw the show from up here before, so I thought I'd come up and watch it." And I thought, those are the nice things that I could write in my scrapbook at home, and the things I remember about the play.
And that's what that theater was built for. Before it was built to show
It was
movies.
vaudeville.
It was vaudevillian. So you have to move on from the theater and you find all these other places. Can you give us some insight into how things came about behind the scenes that you worked toward by the early 80s? By 83 you have a permanent home. Were the seeds laid in the 70s for that? Was there any talk of that?
Well, only 4 years after we organized in '68, we bought a smaller building to rehearse and to house our props and our sets and so on in St. John's Church. So that was the first kind of organizational thing.
You can imagine, we went from doing 15 shows in the 60s to 30 by the 70s. We did 30 shows, and we've done 30 shows every year since.
Those summer musicals. Those are one of the things that
Those are the biggies.
the Beaver Dam Community Theater is known for.
Yes. And supports us. And that's where our major income comes from. It's also the most expensive production, but it also has the high percentage of income. Yeah.
Can we share some fond memories of summer shows, whether building sets, whether on the stage, whatever it may be? Kolstad?
Yeah. Well, my very first show was in 1971. I had told you how I walked through the door and I already was recognized only because I have older brothers that he had had school. But that's when I met my very dear, dear friend, Jerry Camps. And it was his sidekick whenever I could be from that point on, he taught us so much, he gave us so much freedom, he was always encouraging. At that time, I didn't know that you can't mix latex and oil-based paint. I didn't know that. So I was playing my dump and mix game of trying to get a color, and you can't mix those two together. You also can't wash them down the sink. And he never got angry with me, and I had such a mess, but I did learn something through that experience.
But Mary is regarded as the supreme color mixer in paints. And if we want to do anything that we have to have a specific color, Mary's the go-to. She can take all those old paints we have, store it on the shelves, and come up with just exactly what we need.
In either latex or oil.
Yeah.
Only latex now, there's no oil paint allowed, and I do know the difference now. At that point, I did not.
But what was the biggest challenge other than latex versus oil in putting sets together in the 70s?
We worked mostly with flats then, so they may have been caked with previous shows worth of paint.
Kept getting thicker and
I
thicker.
never worried about putting up the set, I only painted it.
Mary, do you remember the sets for Maine? Because those were
Yeah.
quite
Yeah.
complex.
Yep, we worked on that one too.
There were like 10 scene changes.
Yeah, and Picasso type
Different-
designs and, yeah.
So you drew Picasso? You painted Picasso? Like?
As I was told to, yeah.
Because and that was at the theater. And I can't remember exactly how we made those quick
I
changes. There had
can't
to be some
either.
kind of turnaround right on the stage because there was no place to put the sets backstage.
Right.
And then Fiddler, you did the
Yeah.
big mural.
Yep. Yeah, that was the first show that I ever worked on.
Summer musical memories. Anyone else? Summer musical memories.
Well, I know that Barb Auden did a lot of costuming. Yeah.
Now, what was costuming like
Oh,
in the 70s?
it was fun. There was very little, there's very little space to have machines. You just, you sat there with your machines. And like for 1776, that was one of the costumes that had a lot of costumes. And we rented most of them because they were the frilly, froggy, we couldn't make all those. But they all had to be adjusted because our men were, some of them big and some of them real tiny. And so we had a lot of work getting those together. I still remember those. I understand the musical you did just before we got here, it had a lot of mirrors in little spaces. Somebody worked really hard.
King and I.
King and I, that's it. And we kept coming across these little mirrors. So somebody had it harder than I did. But I remember taking down the old curtains that were around the altar at the old Lutheran church. It was a Lutheran church at that time. And I made a costume. John was the padre in Man of La Mancha. And I remember making this outfit with a hood and all that sort of stuff. He used that there, he used it at Wilson Street East when he was the padre in Madison. And then he used it in Timberlake when he was doing Summer Stock Theater. So those curtains really traveled around a lot. I still have one little piece that I put in a Goodwill box yesterday.
Just yesterday.
Yeah, it just almost broke my heart.
Well,
That should be for the history.
that should be, yeah.
What summer musical was it where they brought in a big mobile trailer and put it next to the theater?
I think that started with King and I. Because we
Because there
had
were
such
so
a big
many-
cast.
Such a big cast,
Yeah.
and it was for makeup, but was it also for you
Costumes,
guys
yeah.
to be working with
We
your sewing
used,
machines?
we did use it. It seems like Lois Levenhagen was involved in that.
I don't know.
That early.
That was
I
just
just remember that.
I just remember the trailer out there and how they had to park it on
Remember.
the berm, is that what you call it? The grass next to the road? Yeah.
Yep, and we did that for several, until we stopped using the theater. Every
Yeah.
musical had that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was great too, quite a project to move that in behind the theater. It was huge, mobile home.
Along the side, yeah.
Yeah.
on Beaver Street. And then, of course, people had to run out there and, you know, in between acts.
Right, don't you remember, who made all the gowns for My Fair Lady? I think I must have sold 450 of them. I took them home with me.
I probably
Don't you
did. I don't
remember,
think there were
Barbara
too
had John's
many.
van parked over there, and we had our sewing machines in there.
Yeah, I don't think there
It's
were
kind of a zoo.
You're sewing outside the show,
Mhm.
In the vans.
in the vans, right before,
We used
right
John's
before
van.
showtime.
And sometimes during, because they weren't in.
Just one of those memorable times.
Yeah.
The Beaver Dam Area Community Theater now has a wealth of costumes that are available. In the 1970s, was it show to show? Was there a little bit of a cache built up?
There was some, and it was mostly things that people wanted to get rid of because, and it was very hot up on that second level at the Lutheran church. They had put in some makeshift boards and laid some plywood across. You weren't sure you should step in there, but there were lots and lots and lots of clothes, so you had to dig through a lot of things, and at that time, we couldn't afford much as far as renting things. I think 1776 was one of the first ones where they hadn't done everything from scratch, so.
I think it's interesting how we refer to the old Lutheran church like we haven't been there in years and years and years, when just a few months ago, a few weeks ago, we had a show there
She's
practically.
talking about the St. John's Church. that
There was
we
another
bought
church?
first.
That's where the
1968.
Oh, the Alano Church, that was Saint, so that's, for our purposes, that was St. John's Lutheran Church.
Yes.
What was it a Baptist church
Yes.
then?
Yes.
Yes.
So many places that you guys have been in, how do you keep them all straight?
One of the interesting things about the Baptist church was that prior to it becoming community theater property, I gave a sermon there.
Tell us, do you remember the sermon?
No,
No grass.
Were you wearing a curtain outfit at the time?
no, I was friends with the pastor, and he knew of my interest in theology and invited me into his pulpit. So that was my earliest memory of being in that building.
Does anybody have memories of being in the former Baptist church community theater that we recently vacated, or does anybody have any connections to this building? We're in the former St. Catherine Drexel, which was previously St. Patrick's. I should know that. I went to St. Patrick High School in Chicago, Illinois. Former St. Anybody? I know in our previous installment we had a few guests that had a connection to. And you only knew these buildings as theaters.
Well, my children attended school here, and I directed their Christmas shows in this building.
So you directed. You were the first person to direct the play in this in the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater building. It sounds like you and perhaps Judy Pierce. Was Judy a director? I know she worked at St. Catherine.
She
Drexel
did,
for a while.
but actually Garda Khan, who was participating in community theater and was a piano teacher, music teacher here in Beaver Dam. She's now in Minnesota. But she and I kind of hooked up together to do that. We were friends, and she did the vocals and I did the drama. And we did that for a number of years.
What role did kids have in the 1970s? Did we not see the youth troop programs until the 80s, or was there some semblance of that in the 70s?
And I wanted to be sure we brought that up because John was in 1776, which Melita Quinlan directed, correct?
Right.
And then shortly after that, she directed Wizard of Oz, which I think was one of the last shows we did at the movie theater.
Huh.
And then there were a number of children in that production, so that evolved into her idea about having a children's theater. So that was established in 74.
In
So that's in
74.
that decade, yeah.
And then 74, 75, did it continue through the years into what we know
It's-
today?
Mhm.
That's, isn't that
Tell
something? Tell
Children's theater, yep.
So were there kids that would work on adult productions like Wizard of Oz back then?
Yes, I can mention Thousand Clowns.
Thousand Clowns.
Because Bob Hanson, my dearly departed, talk about people who, we all worked with. he was in 1,000 Clowns. So and this moved with my house. I don't know, it was in a drawer, and it got moved along, and so I still have it. But in that show, there was a group, it's called Special Sound Effects, Kids Chorus. And there were like 2 or 3 Heindel kids. There were 2 bus kids. Becky, who's here tonight, she was in it. Couple Van Haren kids. 3 Hanson kids. Anyway, they had to sing this little song. It was called Chip, 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 Chipper Monkey, and this was the Chipper Monkey. And the girls still remember it. Every now and then, they'll sing that song. But, so they didn't get kids involved, you know.
And behind the scenes too, there were kids painting.
Yeah, and
People showing tale.
Yeah.
So again, this is part 2 of a series looking at the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater through the decades. We looked at the 1960s in the first part of this. Can you give us some insight into how the organizational structure evolved in those years? Was it different from the 60s into the 70s, or was it part of the same arc, the evolution up until you entered your permanent house in the 80s? Define the 1970s in terms of the organization and in terms of what you could remember at that point.
You were on the board, Carmen, at that time.
I was just trying to think when there was really a formal board established.
Right at the beginning.
Was there?
Right at the beginning when Tom Wills created the Constitution. And then we had the same structure we have today, 3-year terms. And we had voting at the annual meeting, and we'd have nominees. One thing that's different now is we have, we solicit people who are interested in the board and they're officially nominated, but I noticed in our green room notes, which was a newsletter that we sent out for years to keep in touch. We didn't have email to keep in touch with, and and in that time we'd have like maybe 10 nominees and only 3 would be voted in. But we did that way. And we also had a membership. You had to have $1 membership to vote, which we don't have anymore.
And I think you had to pay $1 to be in any show, because I saw a list of members, and it was a long list. And I mean, like, even these kids who were in a little thing like that were on there as members, because I'm sure for insurance purposes, they had to pay $1.
Yeah. And then we just kept on, just as we do today, we kept on writing bylaws to help structure what was going on. We were always real interested in keeping a sound organizational structure. I think that's what's helped our longevity also, and we have a lot of people in the background who, attorneys and so on, who advised us over the years. Our basic structure is the same, but we've changed things as we needed to. When Telltale came on board, that was something else we had to include in the Constitution. We established in the 70s, we established a management staff, which we had, and that meant there was someone permanently in charge, overall umbrella, in charge of props or sets or costumes or publicity, just again to have more continuity. So we established that in the 70s.
Right.
And I think we just evolved as a need arose, but the board met every month, and there were always long meetings. And I think we have separate committees, standing committees that take care of some of the things that our board did in the earlier years, and then their proposals come to the board, so it's more efficient in that way. But we also have more to consider and deal with too.
Who all was on the board here? I know some of you mentioned it in the opening statements. So pretty much everybody. The Nowickies over here have been remaining kind of silent in the last few rounds of questions.
We're learning a lot.
Can you give us some insight into some of the things that were tackled in the years that you guys were on the board?
See, toward the end, we were more in the business end of it. We did tickets and we were business managers and so forth. So when you talk about all production, what you did, we weren't there to do that. We could do the business stuff at home.
You did the business. What was the business like for the community theater in the 1970s? You're balancing checkbooks essentially at this point?
Pay bills and so forth.
Mhm.
Everybody had to turn their bills into us.
Yeah.
Hopefully it would all.
What were you spending money on in the 70s? I imagine it's probably not too different than today, but
Actually, you know what? When we were gearing up to do a show, of course, we had to figure out what we were gonna do and how much the budget was gonna be. And it was amazing what our budgets were, right?
Okay.
$700, that was a show.
Do we remember what the ticket
Everything, you know?
price, the ticket prices? Anybody remember? Do we have any ticket stubs or anything?
Oh,
Probably
you know what, I looked up that information, and it was, yeah, it was like $1 for the main floor, 75 cents for the balcony, and 50 for something, I don't know.
But you know what, that was part of our job as a board member, or as a board, we had to establish a budget and make sure we stayed in it. And, I don't know, we did, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was about it.
Yeah, I was treasurer for
Yeah, you were.
some time,
Yeah, it was too.
How'd the numbers look back then?
very small
Did they,
compared to today.
did they wash? Everything set?
They
Yeah,
came out,
they always came
one
out.
way or another, it worked itself out.
How was attendance in the 1970s?
Great.
I would
yeah.
say it's always been good.
Yeah, yeah. What particular community entities, businesses, nonprofits were you guys partners with, affiliated with? Who helped you guys out in the community?
Well, you look at one of these programs here,
Yeah,
you see all the different businesses that work toward each.
on the back, I think.
You know,
Patrons, yeah, we
Way on
have
the back.
And patron members too.
There's your acknowledgements. All the different businesses and so forth that helped out one way or another.
Did you have a program for every play?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Dating back to the first one.
They're all individually made at that time. We didn't have a playbill like we have today.
Is
So
that
they're
right?
all created and run on the, well, Masterprint. Masterprint did a lot for us, and I think they
Well, we
contributed
also
to.
had a chairman for each thing that could, if there was a patron membership chairman, that was your obligation to go out and solicit members for the theater. And, I guess, I had that job a couple times. I need to go home.
I did write some figures, because I thought these were interesting. For example, the expenses for Harvey, now we're talking, 1964, 65, 625. Then we get up to Arsenic, and there the expenses were 1,046, but we're paying theater rent of 300 and royalties of 118. Then we get to Oliver, which is 1972, and now our budget is 3,725, and royalties are 760. So in a short amount of time, and then I asked you, like, what's the budget now for a show?
Between 30 and 40,000 for a musical.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
What did you say again?
Between $30,000 and $40,000 for a musical.
Yeah.
Things have changed considerably.
Yeah, I mean,
Things have changed.
our profits in those early shows, $315, now we have to make a lot
And
of
we begged
money.
and borrowed a lot
I
in
know.
those days.
Yeah.
But we've always worked toward being as professional as we could be, so that worked toward more expenses and more renting of costumes and better sets and so on. And so then
Yeah.
we did more shows and
Yep.
realized that we had to increase our income to do a better show. So that's the way we grew, I guess. Yeah.
And Carmen, you had these notes with you? These are notes that you were able to, you got these at your house?
I've been working on these albums.
On these albums?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so as I'm going through them, a lot of things just catch my eye. And
Whose are these? Are these properties of the
Yeah,
community
and
theater? These
they're-
might be in the history portion?
they're going to be. They're
Okay.
down in the office in the old theater, and they're in very bad shape, some of them. And there's pages that need repair, and so that's what I'm working on.
Okay. So you just had Bob at your house then?
Yeah.
That was the only?
That's the rest of these I brought here to the history room because I was tired of seeing them in my living room.
Does anybody else have memorabilia from the old, that doesn't even have to be from the 70s necessarily?
Yeah,
Is there
lots of-
anything that you,
yeah.
that sticks out as
Programs.
something that is important to you?
A lot of pictures, beautiful pictures, of cast pictures and color pictures. But the the photographers have taken over the years.
Yeah, we've had cast pictures taken for every show, even to today. And those will be either displayed or recorded in some way here too. I have the hat that David Proctor wore in the first production, and I intend to put that in the history room. I have a couple of beautiful small quilts that Lois Levenhagen made for me after directing a show, and they're beautifully designed thematically with the show, and then she has the cast member signatures and crew member signatures on there. So those will go to the history room someday. I'm not part of them yet, but they'll go there.
Carol, ever did anything of Louis Phelps?
There was a photographer in town, Morris Photography, do you remember that name?
Yes, I do.
And he would do individual pictures of cast members and give them to you. I have a 16 by 20 picture that I've given to my kids. But
That was taken during Cactus Flower?
yeah, he was just a very, very generous contributor. He would just do that.
Another example of those community entities that you collaborated with over the years.
I wonder if any of you were involved. I think this started in the 70s. Telltale had a core adult group that would do shows for schools. And we toured around to the schools. Were you involved in that? Was that in the 70s,
I
Carmen?
remember you
You
did
remember that, Barbara?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a wonderful program. We did that for quite a few years. I think it got more difficult to get adults to be available during the day to go into the schools.
You and I did a program at a church.
Yes.
Some, I don't remember.
That's kind of an offshoot of the theater.
Yeah.
Marge Johnson directed that.
Yeah.
That's Jeff Johnson directed Oliver, which you were in. Yeah. So I think that's interesting too, that young people learned a lot and developed a lot and became directors or costume designers or whatever. We have quite a wonderful legacy of young people who started here and now are in theater in some professional capacity. So, yeah.
What is the community theater meant to each of you individually? I'd like to go around the table and ask that question, and maybe we'll go the opposite way this time. Annette, do you want to start?
I think I talked about that last time as well, but certainly been a huge part of my life. It's something that I share, the interest and fun of it, I share with my husband, and many, many wonderful memories. And now, since he's passed, it's a part of my life that can fill that void. So, it's a creative outlet. I've loved theater since I was a kid in high school, and always in high school wished I had access to a community theater, and so, this is like a fulfillment of all of that.
John, 3,500 productions over the years? you
Over the
say?
years, yes. So it's kind of my memories. Because I started my theater, quote, career here, being able to move through the early years of community theater in Beaver Dam, and then move on to Madison, to Michigan, to Illinois. I mean, that's a lot of theater work, the number of productions that I've been part of. And it's meant a lot. It's difficult now because I just can't move any longer, so I can't be on stage. The last time I was on stage was 3 summers ago, and when I played the barber in Man of La Mancha, and I had real difficulty moving in that play, and so I created for myself a barber pole that enabled me to get up and down steps, and so I still have that barber pole so, that I thought might be useful to the history section here, but of course, a large part of my life through theater experience.
And now we'll go to your lovely wife.
I think not only the friendships that we've made locally, but we have been very fortunate to meet wonderful people. People that have gone on to do wonderful things. A friend of ours just won a Tony Award for her performance. In fact, her second Tony. And so...
Who's that? Do you want to give a plug for her?
Well, her name's Jane Howdyshell. I don't know whether any of you would probably know her or not, unless you're in Broadway, because, but she's quite well known in the Broadway theater circle. And and who played your daughter in Fiddler, or Sarah?
Oh, yes, see her a lot of commercials.
Ben Affleck's wife.
Yeah.
Garner?
No,
Garner.
Jennifer
Garner.
Garner, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And, you know, it's just fun to see people starting out, because she was like 18 when John acted with her. And, you know, it's wonderful to be able to watch and see these people move on to bigger and better things.
And it's funny how everything kind of circles back to where your roots were.
That's exactly right. He finished on stage here at Beaver Dam.
Mary, what do you think this theater, what does this mean to you?
Well, I guess my very first experience was it was such a magically creative place. It was like stepping into a whole other world for me and offering me opportunities to explore and to create and hone artistic skills and solve problems and grow and change and gain more and more experience, take on more and more responsibility. It's also been a place where I've involved my daughters. They were involved while they were here in Beaver Dam too. Lucky enough to work with Jerry Camps as well, so that is really cool. And I'm still involved today. I'm in, and then I'm out for a while, and then I'll throw myself back in. But it's just a magical place for me, with a creative, just giving me a creative outlet.
Mary's participating in painting the mural we're going to have in the lobby, in the entryway of this building. So it's going to be spectacular.
Do we want to, well, I guess people that are watching this later might already know what the mural looks like,
Yeah.
so it'll be a surprise.
It'll be a surprise.
Carmen, what does the theater mean to you?
Well, back in the 70s and 60s, what it meant to me was getting out of the house and away from the kids. And that was pretty good in itself. But no, it was the friendships, meeting new people, away from just, Bob was in the school business, and so, you know, it was meeting people from business and other parts of the community. And then in the early 80s, in 78, I went back to teaching. And I had to, after not having taught for 15 years, I had to really hone in on that. And so I had to back away from doing much theater stuff. But I kept my finger in, but not like I had been. And I think I missed that, because there's a group of people now that I don't know that well. You know, I know them casually, but not like when we were all working together. So.
And they're here working in the theater that you helped shape. All of you helped shape.
Yeah.
Carolyn.
Now, you see, Carmen answered it right away when she said, got me out of the house.
Oh.
You know, from the day that my son walked up the back steps on our house on Beaver Street, and he said, Mom, the phone's gonna ring, and I said, yeah, what did you do now? And he said, well, I told the lady that they're having a play, and they wanted to know people who like to sew. So he said, my mom loves to sew. And guess what happened? That was the beginning of the end for me. I spent every moment I could at community theater doing whatever I can to make it be successful.
Or in a mobile trailer outside the theater, sewing right before
It made
showtime.
a difference to me, but you know, after I kind of got away from the theater, I have always missed it. It's always been part of my life. Unfortunately, I can't do that anymore. But I am eternally grateful for having let them be part of my life for as long as it was, because it certainly was a gift for me to be here. And to have a buddy like Carmen.
They let the two of us direct and produce a show now. Can you believe it?
Was this the one show you directed? You said you directed one show? How did that go? Tell us about it. What show was it? What was the name of it? Was that Cactus Flower?
No, can't you just tell it that we had a really good time? I don't know about the rest of the cast and people, but, you know, we had a good time.
It was a fun time.
It was, yeah, Prisoner of Second Avenue.
Yeah.
Prisoner of Second Avenue was the show. A musical, a comedy?
Oh, no, I think it was a comedy.
Oh,
Maybe it wasn't meant to be.
It was a great show.
No, it was good.
What do you remember from it, Carolyn?
What do I remember from it? I remember the opening line of the play.
You do?
Why do I remember that? It drives me nuts when I think about it. Yeah, Mel, what's the matter? Can't you sleep?
That's the opening line of the play.
Remember it?
No.
She said, what's the matter, Mel? Can't you sleep? He said, well, I'd be gone down in the middle of the morning if I could sleep.
All right, there you go.
There. That was it, right?
And anybody else have any unusual lines that they remember from plays of yesteryear? Anything? What jumps out of your mind, John?
Yeah, not much these days. I told you about the Chicago line.
The Chicago line, of course.
Yeah.
So you're saying Fiddler on the Roof was not set anywhere near Chicago originally?
No.
It's important to point out.
And I doubt if people in Anatevia knew anything about Chicago.
Probably wasn't gotten there,
Dory, what has the community theater meant to you over the years?
Well, for the time that I was involved, for that probably 15 years or more, thoroughly enjoyed it, but I have always worked full-time, as you probably know at the radio station. You don't get much time off. So I had to squeeze it in between weekends and nights and so forth. And then when my kids got a little older, then they started to participate, so it was a little bit easier. But I really enjoyed it, especially the musicals, and especially when Annette would direct them. Those are the ones I always wanted to work. But since then, and then eventually we did leave as well, not as members, but we weren't able to work on productions anymore. But we've always kept going to every production we possibly could while we were in town. But I don't think I've ever missed a musical that they put on here, because they are my absolute favorites, especially Fiddler and Joseph.
Oh, Fiddler was great. It was just a great show.
Bernie?
Well, at the time that I was active, it was a way of getting away from business. Because at that time I was building a new business, starting a new business, and it was just a way of getting away, and it was an enjoyable way of doing it because you were around a lot of people. You got to be with people, and it was just a real nice sideline. Just great.
Bernie, what does it mean? Have you seen a play here in this new theater yet? You haven't had many
Yeah.
chances.
Yeah.
We're going tomorrow night.
We're going tomorrow night.
Well, what does it mean to you to be able to come? You've walked around this new theater now. You've seen what's been done here.
Well, it makes me feel very proud that we have this in our small little town. I mean, to have a big theater like this, it's wonderful.
Knowing that
Annette gets so much credit.
Yeah, it's, like I said before, it's all along the line, we've been building toward this, all of us.
You were the instrumental.
Carolyn, how about you? What does it mean to see a facility like this, knowing that you were jumping around from the Lutheran church to the Wisconsin theater?
It never gave me a chance to think about that. I was always running around doing something. I was just floored when Ned took me into the theater tonight. I said, oh my God,
This
this
is the
is
first
just
you saw it.
unbelievable.
Wow.
It's just fantastic to think that we have a theater of this size here. You go down to Madison, you don't even see a theater as good as this in Madison, you know? It's a wonderful place, and Annette, you are to be congratulated for getting it here. It is beautiful.
Well, like I said, we have a lot of help raising that money.
And the chairs downstairs are permanent. They don't have to be taken out.
Yeah, I'll let you get to try.
Stage doesn't have to be moved.
No.
Now, in this room they do, I shouldn't speak to, because this room we're in is, you would be in charge of putting the chairs up and taking them down. Carmen, how about you? What is it like to be in this new building?
Oh,
After all the history that you've had with this theater?
it's unbelievable. I mean, the fact that we were able to do this is just amazing, I think. I love bragging about it to my out-of-town friends. My kids are very impressed, you know, they came for the open house, and because they lived through it, but not directly, you know. They knew Mom and Dad were gone to the theater, and so this is the culmination of all those years. Yeah, they're impressed too.
We benefited from a lot of leadership over the years, all of our presidents, the dedication of the board.
Yeah.
You know, we've had a lot of leaders who kept it going.
Oh.
And Scott Eberly is the latest
Yes.
president. He's been a real, you know, there every day making it happen.
Yeah. It's been often said he volunteered the work of a full-time project manager,
Yeah.
essentially.
Exactly.
And of course, in that volunteered the work of a full-time fundraiser, essentially, along with Jim Flynn.
And she has been the glue since the very beginning.
Yeah.
That kept the organization going. I'm sure there were times when it would have been easy to say, we can't do this, you know, this is just too much. But Annette had her focus on the future, and she just
It's an addiction.
found a way to
Carmen.
keep it going.
They have anybody else want to weigh in on Annette's role here over the years before we
Please, no
before we move on? She's getting red in the face. We'll move on to Mary. They have a scene shop here.
They do.
Yeah.
And good lighting, which was something that I've been howling and whining about for quite some time. And it was heard. I'm so excited. Although I am a person who does resist change a little bit, so I loved a little Lutheran church. Then I went away to college and I worked for a while, so when we moved into the Baptist church, that was all new. Now I love the Baptist church, and I know every nook and cranny, and it makes me a little bit sad, just because of the history, and I've spent so much time there. But I'm very excited to just move on and come here too. I worked on a set. Well, I did a
She
special
did the
project.
jukebox.
Yeah, the jukebox
For the
And
Patsy
the
Cline
last
show.
Yes.
Yeah.
You built a jukebox?
Beautiful.
There's a beautiful jukebox that was on stage.
That was a fake jukebox.
And you
My
propped
friend
that up?
Ronnie and I and my husband Phil.
That's not a paint job, that's an
No,
actual,
it was made out of, yeah, tubing and junk that we spray painted and caulk that I
No.
cake decorated to make all, and then spray painted, and that's what I mean. I've been around a long time, so I'm a good problem solver now.
and you're still doing work and you're gonna continue doing
I
work
will
here.
continue to do work, yeah, yeah.
Craig, that encourages me to say too, that one comment we've heard about what keeps the community theater going is that we find unlimited sources of talent in this area. It's not just Beaver Dam, it's the whole surrounding area. We are so fortunate. I think part of it is that we give opportunity for talent to develop, but also we attract and support and are thrilled to see talent come to us.
We
You
haven't
know,
asked,
Ned, I was gonna tell you, the one thing I did for community theater that made me very proud was I held the first pancake breakfast here.
That's right.
And I want you to know, that was a total labor of love. We borrowed John McKinstry's white Cadillac, and we drove to Madison to see Leo Biscaglia. And on the way down, we got an idea for a fundraiser. And Rick said, we can't do this, we gotta have a board meeting in order to approve this budget. I said, we got a quorum right here in the vehicle. So we called a meeting to order, and we decided that we had to figure out how we get a budget together to get a pancake breakfast, because the church had everything we needed in it.
Sure.
It had the stove, it had everything we needed. And so we took a vote, yep, and right on through. We went down to see Leo, we came home, we had a meeting, we said, yep, we're gonna do a pancake breakfast.
We probably wouldn't get away with that today.
Robert's rules doesn't.
I think we're gonna get the money. I said, we're not spending a dime. We're gonna go out and we're gonna get every member to bring something. I had people that brought us eggs, pancake mix. Lou Stungo helped me make the pancakes. We never spent a dime. And we made some $700 on those crazy pancakes. And it was really such fun.
It was great.
Yeah, it was. That was our first fundraiser.
And that was, if I remember, on Father's Day. Father's Day
Father's Day,
weekend.
it was,
And
yes.
I think you set that precedent, and we had it several years after that.
And somebody asked me how we did that, and I said it was easy. We just borrowed John's car and we went to Madison.
Sylvia.
We had our board meeting and that was
It
it.
had a name.
Yeah,
I don't think we could do that again on that, but it was sure fun doing it when we did.
I think we should do it again, Carolyn.
I don't think John will let us use his cat.
Something tells me there will be more fundraisers. Do we know what year that was?
Well, it was in the 70s.
It was in the
Oh,
70s.
it was, well, it was the first fundraiser we ever
Oh,
had.
so when you said there was a kitchen, we're talking about the Alano Club now, which was
No,
again the old.
we're talking of, oh, that's right. No, it was the Baptist church.
Okay, the Baptist
I'm sorry.
church, okay.
So that would have been early
Or-
It
80s.
had a
early
wonderful
80s or so.
kitchen,
Yeah.
so there wasn't any problem as far as that. I don't think we ever gave long. We're just gonna do this and that'll be fine.
Yeah, that kitchen went out of favor over the years. It didn't get used much
Yeah.
later on, but early on in the
And a
early
little
days.
bit-
Yeah, I wouldn't have called it wonderful.
No.
Actually, I want you to know that I bought the stoves that were in that building.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you did.
And I used them in the tavern.
Oh, you did?
I would place the stoves in the tavern.
A rolling quorum. I was not aware of that story.
I had to be a little creative in order to get that going.
I've been asking everybody else about what the community theater meant to them, and I'll let you guys off the hook if you don't want to answer that, because you may have touched upon that in earlier answers. But if you want to answer it, that's great. If not, what do you think the community theater has meant not only to you but to this community? And you can answer either one, or both.
Oh, I think a healthy community is one that has to have a variety of expressions, not just business and trees and beauty, but to have a creative outlet like theater that requires so many facets and talents, you know, carpenters, painters, and not just actors, but something that is rich as this, and for this community to watch how this community theater has grown and what this has become is an amazing. I don't know how many people appreciate that that growth and that life, you know, that comes to you know, and just keeps growing and giving, and Lord knows what the future holds. But here we are, and I think people, well, when we were at the open house, it was exciting to see the number of people who came through, and we're excited that this place was here.
What did you think when you walked through the Fine Arts Center for the first time?
Well,
You couldn't ask, I mean, it's just marvelous. I mean, especially if you know the background of what has happened before. I think that if you had walked in, it would have been very nice. But when you compare it to what the growth that has happened over the years, it's remarkable, just remarkable.
Yeah, Annette, I don't think have I had this opportunity to ask you this yet. Well, what do you think of this place?
But I've been thinking of answers while you're talking, and now I've been putting it together in my head. Well, first of all, I think we are all very proud of the new identity that we've given to our community. And what I valued over the years that I can only see expanding is, you know, we're kind of like a mini community in that we have people of all ages, of all walks of life, who work together for a common goal. I think that's what attracts me to theater primarily. And that's unique, I think, to create that kind of a feel that expands throughout the whole community. I also think it's quite unique for a community theater to own a building like that and be responsible for it. I'm not sure that there's another one exactly like that, and I haven't explored that. I know we have semi-professional theaters that do that in the state, but this is a very unique situation for our community, and I hope that it only helps us grow and prosper and develop our downtown, and like John said, many opportunities to come that we can't even realize.
Last call for stories before we wrap things up. Last call.
Well, I think one of the things that people who view this, this video should get in touch with as they watch, they look at who's sitting around this table. This is the history. I mean, these are the people sitting around here who lived the beginning and who have arrived now. And I don't know that you're ever going to be able to get another video that may have as rich a historical context as the people who are here bring to this particular video.
And you have done that. You've all brought that, that interesting perspective with you. And it's been an honor for me to be able to sit here and hear these stories. So I'll put that last call out again. This side of the table has been a little quiet again.
We're just listening.
You're enjoying it like I am. I do want to thank you for letting me be a part of this. This was a very interesting opportunity for me today. I'll go around and, for the historical record, remind everybody who is here again. Bernie Nowicki, Dory Nowicki, Carolyn Buss, Carmen Hansen, Mary Kolstead Miller, Barb Otten, John Otten, and Annette Cams. I'm Craig Warmbold, and again, I want to thank you for letting me be a part of this conversation this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.